Hey, it's Mike over at Cross Country Mortgage, and it's Monday morning. It's time for your Monday morning mortgage update for the week of August the 19th. Hope you all had a great weekend. Boy, the weather got cooler in the North State. Big rain, thunder, showers Friday afternoon. What a cool storm that was. I can't remember the last time that happened in August, but definitely cooled things down and looking forward to a great week. So, what happened last week? What's going to happen this week? I always try to give you insight, tools, tips, tactics so you can talk to your buyers and your sellers and have those more impactful conversations. So last week, nothing. Rates stayed flat. Two opposing data points came out. Number one, inflation hit expectations. That's good. Didn't go up, didn't go down. We'd rather it go down. And retail sales were above expectations. So the inflation hit expectations should actually been good for rates. Retail sales above expectations. People are buying stuff, should have been bad for rates. So they kind of offset each other. So what are we looking at this week? Jackson Hole, Wyoming, looking at some numbers from last year to this year, and geopolitical. So every year there's a symposium, a big conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming called the Jackson Hole, Wyoming Economic Symposium. All the economic leaders from around the world, the G7 countries, show up in Jackson Hole. They got there probably yesterday, and the meeting really starts Thursday and ends Friday. Technically, it's a Fed meeting because all the Fed members show up and they have to check in, and it's technically a Fed meeting, but no policy is going to be impacted by it. They're not going to raise rates or lower the Fed fund rate at it. But all these leaders show up and they tell us through media, through presentations, through all of these different channels, globally, what's happening with inflation, what's happening with growth, what's happening with employment. We're a global economy, so what happens in other countries is important as far as what happens in our country. People putting money in the bond market, which has an impact on mortgage rates. So we'll be paying a lot of attention to what all these leaders say, our Fed members say this week, with that meeting starting Thursday, ending Friday. And so it could impact rates. If we see weak news coming globally, that's good for mortgage rates. If we see strong news, strong reports coming globally, then that's bad for rates. And let's look at some numbers here. I wanted to show you a comparison between last year's Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the numbers that existed last year and the numbers that exist this year. So in 2023, we saw core PCE. That's the personal consumption expenditure. It's the number one thing that the Fed uses to fight to gauge inflation. And in 2023, inflation was 4.3% on that PCE. Now it's 2.6. Now their target rate is 2.0. So look at the improvement. We've actually seen on the PCE inflation get better by a substantial amount. Now you wouldn't hear this in the news, but this is impactful. This means that what the Fed's been doing for months now is working. We're starting to see the PCE come down, the core inflation come down. It doesn't mean that groceries are less or gas is less. It just means that core PCE is coming down. Core CPI, that's the number that came out last week, 4.7. Last week it came out 3.2. So again, that CPI number is coming down as well. Again, we don't see that translated on the streets. Kind of interesting here. These inflationary numbers show that they're getting better, but stuff isn't cheaper. It's definitely not cheaper. Unemployment rate went up in a year from 3.5 last year at Jackson Hole, right before Jackson Hole meeting, to 4.3, and we expect that to go up next month. So fewer jobs, people have fewer jobs. We're starting to see that inflation number report go up. And the 10-year Treasury, which is a sideline estimate on what mortgage rates are doing, 4.15 down to 3.9 this year at the same time. And that's a good sign that we're going to start seeing these rates. They're starting to trend better. But one thing that's interesting is the Fed fund rate hasn't changed. So the Fed's doing all this work, but they haven't changed the Fed fund rate. They haven't lowered the Fed fund rate. Now, that could change in September. Everybody expects the Fed to lower the Fed fund rate in September. It would be the first time they've lowered it in a very, very long time. It also shows us in a year they haven't raised it. They've kept it flat. And so hopefully this puts things in perspective on really what was a year ago and what we're looking at this year. Then the second thing is geopolitical. A lot of stuff happening with Serbia going into Russia, and obviously with everything happening in the Middle East. But everything's happening and nothing's happening. There's been no escalation of of troops and bombs and everything else. And this is a good thing. Cooler heads are prevailing. Look, there's a lot of money on the sidelines right now, millions of dollars on the sidelines with investors, because they're keeping the money out of the stock market in a sense, because if we see an escalation of what's happening in the Middle East, that's going to cause a flight to safety because they don't know how it'll impact the economic markets globally, and they'll put their money in our bond market. But the money's not in there yet. It's sitting on the sidelines. So if nothing happens over there, if there's no escalation in these wars, if you will, and cooler heads prevail, that money will start to come out of the bond market and actually invest elsewhere, and we could see rates go up. So if we see calmer heads prevail, cooler heads prevail this week, we could see rates actually creep up a little bit. So hopefully this gives you some perspective on what's happening. We're floating into this week, really into Thursday and Friday. There's probably an indication that we're going to see rates get better than worse. If you have any questions on the market, don't hesitate to give me a call. If you know somebody that can benefit from this video, please forward it to them. Have a great, productive week. And look for my Friday follow-up video that comes out Friday morning. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.